Explorers and NQE Overland with another one of our historical walkthrough videos. If you're not subscribed to our new NQE Overland channel, head across there now. I'll put the links in the description or on the base of this video. And on that channel, it's a sister crossover channel from NQE Explorers. We'll be putting up these kind of travelogue and historical videos that don't necessarily include any metal detecting. So today I'm really looking forward to today's little drive. It's about a 2-hour drive out in the bush. I'm still on the bitumen, but I'll turn on the gravel shortly. To a remote bush cemetery. I have never been there. I've researched the site and I'm confident I can find it. And it's typical of these old ghost towns in these remote areas that these little cemeteries exist, because obviously life was harsh and pretty much the first bit of ground they pegged on a new town was a cemetery. So going to go and have a look and pay our respects to the early pioneers of this area. We're heading high up into the Great Dividing Range in a beautiful remote location that served a gold and silver mining community. Okay, I'm just travelling through this spectacular Great Dividing Range, sandstone escarpment country, big deep valleys and high sandstone rock towers. Spectacular stuff. It's about 35 kilometres along this gravel road in deep in the mountains. So it'll be a slow old trip getting in there, but I should be there in about 40 minutes according to the GPS, and we'll have a look around the cemetery and I'll tell you a bit about the site. I'm deep in the Great Dividing Range in the mountains of New South Wales at the site of an old bush cemetery which dates from the 1860s, 1870s through to the 1920s. It served a gold and silver mining community which was wiped out in a bushfire in the late 30s, and there was no mining in the area since. Obviously it's all historically listed and it's a cemetery, so there's no relic under here. But when Colin and I travel Australia to these remote sites where we do our coin and relic hunting in these old ghost towns, we always make a point of going to the old cemetery. It's a real cross-section of the society that lived in these remote spots at the time, and a testament to the harsh conditions they lived under. Mining accidents, lots of children in there unfortunately. You often see mothers burying 5 or 6 children in a space of 7 or 8 years. It's pretty horrible. Infant mortality was an obvious issue because any minor complication in a pregnancy or a childbirth wasn't going to end well. So unfortunately you do see a lot of children's graves in these sites. But this spot here is very remote. It's about a 2-hour drive in here. Absolutely beautiful spot. And these little bush cemeteries are always worth visiting if you're travelling around, because it's nice to come and pay the respects to the pioneers that built this country. And even though the town's long gone, it did add to the prosperity of the country at the time, and that led to what we've got now. So they're important places and they're important pieces of history. So thanks for watching the video. I'll take my hat off in respect to the residents of this cemetery. We'll go on and have a look. I'm just outside the boundary fence here. Just an absolutely beautiful spot in the bush. Lots of bird life, big timber. The sun's slowly setting. We've got about 45 minutes of daylight left before we have to drive out of here. But let's have a quick look around in here now. Some very elaborate headstones in here. You can imagine the effort to get marble, a headstone up here. Well, if someone's loved one, they're going to go to that effort in such a remote spot. And it's just hard to appreciate how remote this was in the 1800s. Oh, well, I've just proved myself wrong. That one is a 1927 grave. 1905 and 1927. What a beautiful memorial. There's a general view down the hill from the high side of the cemetery. That's an unknown grave there. There's no headstone or record of the burial. This locally quarried and carved rock and marble headstones, marble details on the headstones. I mean, a lot of bush cemeteries are nowhere near this elaborate, but this town lasted about 40 years, and actually what happened in the end, the town was destroyed by a bushfire and no one returned. But anyway, the gold and silver would have been pretty much worked out to the technologies of the times. That's nice, someone's put a modern plaque there on a very old grave. Look at this beautiful wrought ironwork here and the masonry. There's an old headstone in many pieces that's been propped up by the local council, or often and a lot of these bush cemeteries are maintained by the local four-wheel drive clubs. They come out and they cut the weeds and the grass and look after the place. And if that hadn't been going on for the last 20 or 30 years, the bush would have just swallowed these places up and no one would ever be able to locate them again. Look at the elaborate wrought iron fencing on these. This one's even got a little gate with a cast iron headstone. Unfortunately, that looks like a child's grave. You don't like to see that sort of thing, but it's a reminder of how difficult it was for young children out here in the 1800s with what was just rudimentary medicine. I mean, that was the same in the cities, but at least you had the access to a doctor and a hospital, and that wasn't the case here. Here's another similar cast iron headstone. It's a beautiful big old gum tree here, watching over the cemetery. Look at this little one here. It's very sad. Stanley Mason Prince, 2 years and 2 months. Beautiful memorial though. Another one with an elaborate fence, well over 150 years old. Probably a multiple grave, but with just one headstone there standing. Here's another one, just the top of the elaborate marble work in situ. I wonder where the rest of the headstone is. More children here, unfortunately. 3 years and 1 year. And of course, a lot of children and mothers were lost in childbirth. Any minor complication in the bush and there was always going to be a sad ending to the situation. Not like the medicine we've got these days. What a beautiful little spot on the mountainside amongst the gum trees. Not many visitors here anymore, I guess, but it's maintained, and that's the main thing. It's on the map. There's just one row of graves there. There's none over the back here. That's the cemetery boundary. These are gazetted cemeteries from the 1800s. The town's always had a gazetted cemetery. That was one thing that was inevitable. You're going to need a cemetery. Of course, they wasn't all about infant mortality. There was a lot of mining accidents with black powder and dynamite and cave-ins and all those sorts of things that these days is governed by safety regulations, which just didn't exist back then. All lone miners. There was no company mines up here, just lone 1- and 2-man shows, trying to make a living for the family out of gold or silver or whatever. And then I guess a lot of them just moved on to the next rush, as was inevitable with gold and silver rushes. Lovely spot to watch the sunset, actually. Well, that was a video with a difference from me. But I've just filmed something that Colin and I always do when we come to these old sites, because it's just an amazing connection to history when you relic hunt an old ghost town or an old house site, and then you can come to a cemetery and you probably just dug up some coins or relics that were owned by the people that are now residing here. So it's a wonderful connection to the past. And we always pay respects to the old bush cemeteries. We always make a point of going to the bush cemetery whenever we go to these remote spots, because there's always a bush cemetery. And also there's a lot of lone graves. You find lone graves, a lot of them are documented, but a lot aren't. Lone graves in the middle of the bush on a ridge line or a pretty spot by a creek. And often they can have quite an elaborate headstone. Obviously the favourite spot of a prospector or someone who lived out there and wished to be buried right where they were working. Left my departure a little bit late. The sun's well on the way down and I've got to run the gauntlet of the Twilight Kangaroo Parade on this gravel road. I've got about 30 kilometres of very windy bush road on this corrugated gravel to get back out to the bitumen, but I should make it before dark, but it's going to be slow and steady, I think. Let's get into it. Just poking along nice and steady because the eastern greys are out in force. I guess they're all heading to the water holes or somewhere to sleep for the night, I'm not sure. They hang around these big rock ledges of the sandstone areas, and they just come straight up off the side of the road. They can be a bit of a challenge to avoid at times. But anyway, we'll keep poking along. Got about 10 minutes of sunlight left, and then it'll start getting really tricky. Not fun if it's not difficult. Well, that was a video with a little bit of difference to it. But I mean, on the NQE Explorers videos, Colin and I always like to include history and put our videos and our finds in context. The history part of it is very important to us. It's not a matter of just going and digging up as many relics and coins as you can. Often we don't find very much at all. And that's because a lot of the pioneers didn't own much and they didn't drop much. They didn't have much to be dropped. And in some of the hard rocky soils, well, it just stayed on the surface, and I guess the kids came along the next day and picked it up again. But that doesn't matter. Just to find one or two little poignant connections to the history of a site and that direct line to the pioneers that came out to these remote places and did the things they did. And they were hardy people. They had to be. And a lot of them didn't live very long. Those cemeteries are a testament to that. But you got to admire what the people went through in the 1800s building the country in these remote areas. I just love that kind of history, and it's very important to us, and that's why we like to look at these little sites. And I thought I'd make that little video there today, a little bit different to what we normally do, but it's a lovely insight, a little window into the pioneers of the early mid 1800s. Thanks for watching, everyone.